That's right. That's dominating conversations around the country today. So we'll also delve into that with Kelvin Emmanuel, the Chief Executive Officer of Dairy Hills Limited. Good morning, Kelvin. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ine. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Did you see this coming?
Well, to be honest with you, I was a bit flummoxed and I was taken off guard when I saw the news of this press conference the central bank did. I mean, what is the most important issue in Nigeria right now? Inflation, ways and means lending. The fact that the flooding has devastated several states and is going to really heighten the inflation level that we have in Nigeria. The fact that the budget of 2023 is non-existent because the government has to borrow $20 billion to be able to plug the deficit. So for the governor of the central bank to come up and announce that he's going to spend tens of billions of Naira at the Printing and Minting Corporation in Abuja to redesign 200, 500, and 1,000 Naira notes, in line with examples of what the Reserve Bank of India did in 2014, and the decision of the Bank of England to call back 20 pounds and 50 pound notes, totaling about 17 billion pounds in 2022. It's surprising. If this is a response to the inflation situation we have in Nigeria, it is really surprising.
Thank God you mentioned inflation, because the central bank governor also talked about inflation, that, I mean, if they were dealing with inflation by mopping off currency in circulation. He did mention that more than 2 trillion naira, in fact, almost 3 trillion naira is outside the bank vault. So that is money that cannot be captured. So with this now, and mopping up, if we can mop up almost 3 trillion naira, don't you think that will taper inflation one way or the other?
The question I have for Governor Emefiele is this. So he's talking about 3 trillion naira being outside the banking system and how that is contributing to inflation. But has he realized that between the last 3 to 4 years, the number of notes in circulation doubled? Why? And if he realizes this fact, which I'm sure he knows, is he accepting that the quantitative easing of printing of money out of thin air in violation of Section 38 of the CBN Act on Ways and Means Lending contributed to the fact that the currency notes in circulation doubled? So if he mops up cash and have the deposit money bank send the money back to the central bank and reissue them new notes, is he saying that he's going to restrict the currency notes that are gotten back, the new notes that are reissued, of the depositors from having it? Is he going to place a cap and say, oh, you cannot withdraw more than 50,000 naira from the banks? Is he going to do that? If he's saying that he wants to fight terrorist financing and he wants to fight excessive use of cash during campaign in violation of sections 87, 89, 90, 91, and 93 of the Electoral Act of 2022, that is plausible. But the timing of the decision, especially considering that the issues we have on ground are bigger issues that takes precedence over the redesigning notes, is very suspect.
Yeah, so I like that you've mentioned the issue of politics, because we know that, I mean, if you go through the dailies today, you would see a lot of reasons connected to it. And one of them, obviously, is that issue that it might help to reduce money politics as we head to the polls in February. What level of priority do you see this, when we look at the scale of things? You've noted some of them, the level of inflation and some of those global headwinds that we face in the country at this time. At what level of importance would you place that, dealing with money politics in the country?
I don't think it's the position of the central bank governor to fight campaign financing in Nigeria. Sections 87, 89, 90, 91, I think 92.3, and then 93 list specifically. In fact, there is a bill before the National Assembly that is calling for the setup of PPEOC, as Political Parties Electoral Offences Commission, which EFCC is fighting, by the way. And the reason why EFCC is fighting that bill is very obvious, that it's going to take the mandate of fighting people who violate the Electoral Act, especially when it comes to campaign financing, from them, right? If you set up an independent commission, PPP EOC, which was recommended by Senator Kenny Inamani and the current chairman of PDP, Iyocha Ayu, that were co-chairs of the Political Action Committee at the National Conference in 2014, they will handle the issue of violation of campaign financing. It's not the position of the governor of the central bank to fight the violation of campaign financing in Nigeria. That's why I said earlier that his decision, and considering the timing, is very suspect.
So when would you say it's right? I mean, I haven't seen anyone who has said the timing is right, because when we look at what we have inflation, we have our debt servicing increasing, we have our budget deficit hitting 11 trillion naira, we have fuel subsidy increasing, you know, and then next year we also have census. Let's not forget that. We have census next year, you know. That is also funding that should come from the government. And then we now have this printing of this new notes. And before you can print the notes to circulate the country, I mean, the logistics and the cost of it, I think we should only imagine it. You know, so obviously, I mean, there are some factors. But, I mean, when can we say it is okay for the central bank to redesign notes? What needs should lead to it? We know in the UK, they lost the Queen, and so they have to redesign their notes. But even with them, I think they say have to end of next year before they can stop using the old notes. So, but when, like in Nigeria, can we say it's the right time, you know, to get to redesign? Redesigning currency notes is not even in the agenda of the top 5 to 10 issues in our economy right now. Sections 2 of the CBN Act says that it's a position of the central bank to advise the federal government on its finances. I'll give you some issues that the governor of the central bank should bother himself about, in case his chief of staff is not bringing important issues to his table. Let me give you some issues. Number 1, if the government succeeds in converting the 22 trillion naira of Ways and Means lending overdraft into a 40-year government bond at 9%, you realize that the inverted yield, the bond yield curve in Nigeria is coming into an inverted yield curve territory, whereby short-term bonds, the coupons on short-term bonds is actually higher than the coupons on long-term bonds. What that happens, what that signals typically is that you have a flight from the stock market, which we're already seeing. There's already a flight from the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the NGX. Yeah. And what that will lead to is that you have a negative return on yield. Okay, let's come back to the issue of inflation. Food inflation at 23.34%, core inflation at 20.77%. The fact that if you use the rule of 72 as it stands right now, it takes 3 years and 4 months for inflation rate in Nigeria to double and for the currency to lose 100% of its value. The fact that the governor is not advising the government on the need to adopt a floating exchange rate mechanism that will align the curve and see that the 4 areas through which Nigeria generates FX to be able to stabilize its currency, which are foreign direct investment, diaspora remittances, which are oil receipts, and a 4th one, are actually put in the front burner. The only 2 areas Nigeria currently gets FX out of the 4 areas right now are diaspora remittances and oil receipts. And you can see that the under recovery has typically wiped off 100% of the revenues NMPC gets and pays to the central bank in it. And when you consider the fact that Nigeria says it consumes 66 million liters of PMS as against Pakistan that has population of about 35 million people more than Nigeria, consuming 21.5 million liters of PMS, that is also suspect. These are the issues MFLA is supposed to advise the president on. 2 important areas for source of FX that can stabilize the exchange rate. 2 important areas. Number 1, NXP proceeds. He launched Aruti 200 earlier this year, and it has been a failure. And the reason why Aruti 200 failed is because why will you offer 65 naira incentive for companies to bring in back their FX when the difference between the official and parallel market today as it stands is currently at about 320 to 340 naira?
And companies can basically make more money by diverting their FX to foreign accounts and offshore accounts, or using some sophisticated way of using the black market to convert their money at a black market rate instead of being forced to convert it at the official market rate. So if he's not addressing these issues, then I don't think he's paying attention to the problems that Nigeria has. Redesigning currency notes, 200, 500, and 1,000 has no bearing. It's not going to impact inflation. It has no bearing. The duty of fighting terror financing is the work of the DSS and the NSA. It's the work of the security agencies, not the work of the governor of central bank. The duty of fighting campaign financing is the work of EFCC. And then when the National Assembly decides to pass that bill on PPEOC, Presidential Parties Electoral Offences Commission, in line with the Electoral Act of 22, is going to be the work of the PPEOC. It's not the work of the governor of central bank. That's why I said his motives are suspect, and we should not believe it.
I mean, the governor said yesterday that he has the approval. Obviously, he has the approval of the president. That's why he could come and make that announcement. So most likely, this is going to go through from mid-December. We're going to see the new notes, the redesigned notes, and then by end of January, we're going to have stopped using the old notes. How do we expect this to impact the economy? Talking about investor sentiment, for instance, the issue of certainty. We've talked a lot about policy somersaults in Nigeria. You know, how does this affect the investment climate, business climate, manufacturers' value of Naira?
Well, to be honest with you, you also have to look at the adoption of banking in Nigeria. How many, amongst Nigeria's population of about 209 million people, growing at 30% per year with a fertility rate of 5.4 babies per woman, how many people of the 209 million people are in official banking system? This is a question that MFLA has to ask himself. With the proliferation of agency banking in Nigeria, can we say that people are comfortable dealing with cash, especially in the rural areas and hinterlands, than they are going to the bank and doing banking operations? How many people have access to internet banking? Yeah? How many people in Nigeria have access to mobile phones and can buy internet data to be able to use mobile money and internet banking? These are questions that the governor of the central bank has to ask himself, which makes you wonder why this should be the priority at such a time like this when we have bigger fishes to fry. I don't see any impact on manufacturing. I don't see any impact on manufacturing because if the issue of ways and means lending is not addressed, and if the issue of the fact that conversion of that loan is going to lead to a devaluation by both Fitch and Standard & Poor's, that with Moody's that has already done that. In fact, a report came out yesterday that following the downgrade of Nigeria's local issuer rating from BA3 to B1 and foreign currency issuer rating from B2 to B3, which is heading to a lower investment grade, 9 banks has also been downgraded, including the Bank of Industry, right? So if the credit sovereign rating is downgraded and the coupons on bonds go up, the short-term coupons become higher than long-term coupons, and the yield curve begins to invert, and the yield comes down, this thing comes down. How do you expect that the debt servicing that the government pays to the creditors is not going to affect the economy? The Minister of Finance is complaining about the fact that subsidy and debt servicing is affecting them. How can you put 4 trillion naira in subsidy, PMS subsidy, and then put another heading to 3 trillion naira in debt servicing in the same budget of about 20 trillion naira that has an 11 trillion naira deficit and 2 trillion naira revenue? The metrics doesn't make sense. Debt servicing to government revenue is currently at 108%, which means that 100% of your capital expenditure is off, is wiped off. The next president has to borrow money to implement any capital investment project he wants to do. Where are you going to borrow the money from? At what rates are you going to borrow the money from? These are the questions that the governor of the central bank has to concern himself about. If you're not getting dollar from oil receipts, and if the dollar from diaspora remittances is not enough to be able to supply the markets at the primary wholesale Dutch auction system, why don't you focus on the other two areas, NXP proceeds and foreign direct investments? And when the vice president went to Washington on his trip a couple of months ago, I remember he had a meeting with the World Bank president, David Malpass. And the World Bank president advised the VP on two major issues. Number one, Mr. Vice President, remove the subsidy on petrol. Number two, align the exchange rates, float the exchange rates. The premise on which we've always had a fixed exchange rate system of plus or minus 30 Naira, on which the central bank will intervene, is always been on the fact that 10 years ago, the band was between plus or minus 30 Naira. If you had Naira at the buy at 153, you had the sell at 157. It doesn't go above that range. When Buhari took over at 199, it went haywire. Today, we have a difference from 30 Naira to about 330 or 340 Naira. How can the CBN keep maintaining this fixed exchange rate mechanism when the basis on which they've pinned that mechanism has completely gone off the hooks?
Yeah, Mr.
Foreign direct investors will not come. Yeah. Companies that export will not bring in their remittances because it doesn't pay them. These are the things that the governor has to focus on, not distracting the people by redesigning notes and spending tens of billions of naira that Nigeria doesn't have currently.
All right, Kevin, this is obviously an ongoing conversation. And I guess the central bank themselves will have a lot of convincing to do, you know, to get Nigerians on board on why this should be priority at this time, when, as you've noted, everyone's hands is already filled with just surviving and living day to day. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Kevin Emmanuel is the Chief Executive Officer of Dairy Hills Limited. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. How will this affect the prices of commodity? You want to find out. I want to find out. We'll take that conversation after this short break.